Hey guys, tonight we wander into a cool, dusty corner of history. You probably won't survive this without feeling oddly calm, because you're about to stare at cows painted on church walls from the 9th century. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, post your location and local time in the comments so we can have a real global cow mural meetup later. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge across cracked limestone floors, toes sliding on tiny pebbles, until a soft glow reveals the silhouette of a cow, its flanks rendered in warm ochre and deep sienna, lifted straight from some pastoral reverie in the desert. The church walls stretch high above you, once echoing with monastic chants, now whispering reminders of a time when Nubia embraced Christianity with its very own bovine flair. It's the 9th century, and the kingdom of Makuria stands firm along the Nile's winding banks, one of the longest-lasting Christian states in Africa, enduring from roughly the 6th to the 14th century, as you've probably heard in your high school buzzwords. Yet here, in this humble chapel corridor, the sacred merges playfully with the everyday, a cow, grazing eternally in pigment and prayer. You pause to admire the artist's brushwork, how each gentle arc of the horn seems to nod like a blessing, how the textured hide shimmers under flickering oil lamps. A mainstream historical fact to anchor your drifting thoughts. Nubian Christianity was heavily influenced by Coptic traditions in neighboring Egypt, with bishops traveling to Alexandria to solidify doctrine and liturgy. But here, the local twist is clear. The cow, a creature central to agrarian life, finds its place beside angels and saints. Historians still argue whether these murals were meant to teach peasant congregations about pastoral care in a biblical sense or to serve as apotropaic symbols warding off locusts and drought. You can almost hear that debate echoing in stone, scholarly voices trading parchment crumbs, gesturing at faded frescoes like detectives assembling clues. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some travelers claim that monks occasionally painted tiny red freckles on the cows' muzzles to represent the local belief in cow spirit guardians, invisible forces said to protect herds from evil eye and devilish hyenas. You wonder if those freckles once looked like cattle acne or secret signposts for initiates. Either way, the sight soothes you, like a lullaby in pigment. You shuffle forward, the chill of the evening air brushing your neck. Flickers of carved wooden pews appear, long gone but still present as shadowy outlines. Somewhere above, a faded inscription reminds you that these murals were not just decoration but a sacred language for believers who might never read a single letter of Greek or Coptic script. Here, art was preaching, and cows delivered sermons. As you lean closer to a particularly animated heifer, ears perked as though listening for prayers, you feel a gentle sense of kinship. This creature, half domesticated and half divine, unites the earthly struggles of shepherds with the heavenly promises of salvation. And just as you think you've settled into the rhythm, you notice a tucked-away calf, smaller and rendered in paler ochre, its coat dotted with tiny gold leaf flecks. You almost miss it, but then it winks at you, or maybe that's just a mote of dust dancing in the lamplight. You probably won't survive the urge to trace your finger along its outline, but resist that urge. Finger oils can wreck centuries-old pigment. Still, the impulse feels almost sacred, like wanting to connect physically to a story that's too long, too vivid, to live solely in your mind. In this hush, you realize the mural isn't just about cows. It's a living portal to a world where kingdoms rose and fell, deserts bloomed under Nile floods, and people painted their hopes on cold stone. And here, amid the faint scent of mildew and mortar, you find yourself cradled between history and imagination, lulled by the bovine corral of silent, painted beasts. You slip past a carved wooden screen into a vaulted chamber where the air hums with the memory of royal decrees and hushed prayers. Here, in the heart of Dongola's palace chapel nexus, Nubian kings flexed both spiritual authority and political muscle through the vivid spectacle of painted cows. Imagine you, draped in a rough linen cloak, standing before a sweeping view of ochre and gold, every bovine form sealed into plaster by the steady hands of palace-appointed artists. The king's command was clear: these murals must glorify God, bolster the monarchy, and bind subjects to a shared identity. Three goals rolled into one. A mainstream historical fact anchors this scene. During the 9th century, Mercurian monarchs like King Georgios II wielded substantial influence over church affairs, often dictating liturgical details and artwork designs to underscore their divine right to rule. As you gaze up at a regal cow painted with a crown-like ring of gold leaf around its head, you recall that such imagery served as an extension of the throne itself. The bovine figure, calm and majestic, mirrored the king's own persona, steadfast, nurturing, and divinely sanctioned. Historians still argue whether these commissioned murals were primarily political propaganda dressed in holy vestments or sincere devotional offerings meant to deepen popular piety. You imagine scholars with tweed jackets, chalking outlines on a blackboard as they debate, while you wander beneath the frescoes, weighing their arguments against the brushstrokes before you. A quirky tidbit adds flavor. Whispered in monastic corridors was the tale that some kings insisted on including their own favorite cows, yes, real livestock, into the frescoes. Legend says that King Georgios once rode his prize heifer, Blessinghoof, through the palace, stopping at each mural and insisting the artist capture its likeness exactly, warts and all. Some artists reportedly mixed a bit of actual cow's blood into the red pigment to ensure a lifelike hue. Whether that's apocryphal or not, it shows how royal whims could twist the sacred into the personal. You step closer to a fresco showing a procession of cows encircled by courtiers raised in prayer. The lead bovine wears a delicate garland of white lilies, symbols of purity and resurrection in Coptic iconography, yet the scene feels undeniably Nubian. The floral motif, drawn from local riverine flora, replaced traditional Egyptian lotuses that earlier dynasties favored. That switch wasn't random, it reflected a conscious choice by the King's Council to root Christianity in homegrown symbols. Desert lilies blossomed near the Nile's banks, their resilience in arid soil mirroring the kingdom's own struggle against expanding Islamic caliphates to the north. You probably won't have thought of cows as frontline soldiers in a cultural conflict, but in 9th century Nubia, they quietly led the charge. These murals stood at the border of empire and faith, a silent yet potent reminder that Nubian kings could marshal divine imagery better than any invading army. As you trace the delicate petals of those painted lilies, you sense the subtle tug of political strategy woven into the artistry. Glancing down, you spot an inscription in Old Meroitic script, now barely legible. It reads something like "By the grace of God and by royal hand," although translators still puzzle over precise meanings in places where letters have crumbled away. That uncertainty underscores a broader scholarly debate. Did these inscriptions carry codified royal titles, or were they more generic blessings added by later restorers? Historians still argue whether the original phrases praised specific monarchs or simply invoked God's favor for all who gazed upon the walls. A faint echo of chanting drifts through your mind, monks reciting prayers as they mixed pigments at sunlit windowsills. In one corner, a cow marches alongside an angelic figure bearing a scroll. In another, a calf lowers its head to feed from a stylized chalice that might equally represent a baptismal font or a grail of royal legitimacy. The duality thrills and confounds you. Is the calf a symbol of believers nourished by divine sacrifice, or is it a veiled nod to dynastic succession, an assurance that the king's bloodline would flow pure like Nile waters? Your senses sharpen as you note the pigments: deep lapis lazuli imported from distant mines, rare indigo tones reflecting expensive trade goods, all interlaced with ground ochre sourced from the cliffs of Nubia itself. These materials weren't chosen arbitrarily. Royal patrons insisted on lavish expenditure to demonstrate their wealth and piety in equal measure. Even small villages would hear the rumors: Makuria spends gold on cow paint while we scrape mud for our walls. That tension between elite extravagance and grassroots austerity fueled local debate. Historians still argue whether lavish church commissions strained royal treasuries or acted as economic boosters through artisan employment. You reach out, careful not to touch. For a closer look at a minute curly tail looping like a cursive G, perhaps a hidden signature of the artist or a playful flourish from a court jester turned illustrator. Tradition suggests that palace scribes sometimes slipped personal monograms into royal murals to earn a future pension. That sly practice, if true, adds an intimate human layer to these grand royal projects. Standing in this royal chapel, you feel the weight of centuries balanced on plaster walls. Each leg of every painted cow bears the imprint of political ambition, spiritual devotion, and artistic innovation. You tread softly, aware that you're not merely an observer but a participant in a story that blends thrones and churches, kings and cows, diplomacy and dogma. This bovine parade was no pastoral footnote. It was a calculated march of legitimacy, a processional pursuit of power dressed in holy color. As you back away, the chamber fades into the dim corridor beyond, but the images linger, royal cows forever etched in your mind. You carry their regal gaze with you, a reminder that in Nubia, even the humblest creature could bear the crown's weight and carry the faith of an entire kingdom on its painted back. You drift deeper into the dim corridor, where the cool stone presses against your fingertips and the scent of incense still clings to the air like a lazy cat refusing to leave. Ahead, a broad mural unfolds, a solemn procession of cows, each bearing symbolic trappings that link this humble farm animal to grand biblical narratives. You probably never imagined cows as theological heavyweights, but here they stand cheek to jowl with scenes of manna rains and shepherd kings, a bovine baptism into scripture you didn't know you needed. A mainstream historical fact anchors you: early Nubian theologians and Coptic clergy drew heavily on Old Testament imagery, especially Exodus and Ezekiel, to craft sermon illustrations, and animals often carried weighty allegorical meaning. Cows, in particular, evoked both the golden calf of Israel's frailty and the sacrificial ox of Levitical rites, creating a duality that resonated across congregations on the Nile's banks. Historians still argue whether these murals leaned more heavily on redemptive symbolism or cautionary tales, but either way, the cows played double agent, embodying sin and salvation in one painted hide. As you study the lead bovine, you notice a subtle halo above its head, a faint ring of white chalk dust applied as a later restoration, or perhaps an original flourish to mark its sanctity. That halo suggests the cow represents not the idol of rebellion but the Eucharistic ox, a living altar of Christ's sacrifice. And yet, there's a playful wink in its expression, as if the artist thought, why shouldn't the cow have a moment in the spotlight, too? You can almost hear that medieval artist chuckling behind the scaffold, brush in hand, mixing his pigment while humming a hymn off-key. You step closer and catch the shimmer of gold leaf outlining a calf's flank. An expensive addition that would catch candlelight in worship services, making the animal appear to glow as worshippers filed past. A quirky tidbit bubbles up. Local legend held that if you stood before a freshly unveiled mural and whispered a prayer into the cow's ear, your wish would carry all the more weight because, divine bovine intervention. Some pilgrims swore they'd received blessings of fertility, good harvests, or extra strong sandals after testing that theory. Probably won't work in modern apartments, but hey, you can't blame them for trying. Your footsteps echo softly as you approach another panel where a black and white cow stands between two angels holding scrolls. The scrolls are inscribed in Old Nubian, "The Lord provides." It's a clear nod to the pastoral care motif, casting the cow as a spiritual shepherd rather than a fodder farmer. You note the angels wear beaded necklaces resembling traditional Nubian jewelry. An infusion of local culture into heavenly ranks. That combination of earthly and divine reminds you of a whispered debate in academic circles. Historians still argue whether such local embellishments diluted pure liturgical messaging or enriched it by making the divine relatable to Nubian congregants. A breeze gusts through a broken window high above, carrying the dry whisper of desert sands and the faint croak of a distant frog. Probably the same one you mentioned in Section 1, remembering the Cowspirit Freckles story? See how these echoes tie together? This narrative isn't linear. It's like sipping layered tea. Each sip brings a new flavor but reminds you of the first. You lean in to examine the theological layering. The cow's steady gaze meets yours, as if to say, "I am both sinner and savior," then turns its painted head toward a scene of Abraham's sacrifice, or a ram replaces Isaac. That juxtaposition, cow versus ram, speaks volumes about local dietary customs, since Nubians raised cattle more than sheep and probably found lamb metaphors less visceral. This is theology on home turf, God's covenant recast in the vernacular of the Nile's riverine pastures. You might never have thought sacrifice was so region-specific, but here, geography marries dogma in a fresco that still vibrates 9 centuries later. Your mind drifts to that open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether this local adaptation betrayed Orthodox Coptic theology or exemplified a dynamic faith that welcomed cultural nuance. You imagine gray-bearded professors pacing libraries in London and Cairo, each clutching their favorite journal article and pointing at photos of this very mural, determined to prove their interpretation right. Meanwhile, you stand here wondering if they've ever actually smelled wet plaster and oiled wood the way you have. A gentle drip of water from a ceiling crack breaks the hush, pattering like distant applause. You step back to take in the mural's full breadth. Cows of various breeds, some sleek and domesticated, others wilder, horned creatures with fierce eyes, march in ordered formation beneath a blazing sun. That sun was once painted in blazing cinnabar but has faded to a lazy rose, sun-bleached by centuries of Nubian heat and maybe one too many monsoon seasons. That color loss fuels another fringe discussion. Were the cows once set against a blood-red sky to evoke martyrdom? Or did weathering simply drain the palate like time itself? You probably didn't think you'd find existential questions in church art about pasture animals, but here they are. Nearby, a tiny scene shows a cow drinking from a river that bends into a cross shape, a clever visual pun that even today would earn you a design award on Instagram. You pause, imagining mischievous monks adding that flourish overnight to lighten their strict fasting regimen. Artistry with a wink, because even piety needs humor. As you circle the chamber, notice how each cow stands on a narrow ledge painted to resemble rolling hills, a motif borrowed from Byzantine landscapes. Yet the hills here cradle palm fronds and papyrus reeds, Nubian flora, tipping you right back to the Nile Delta. That blend of borrowed artistry and local adaptation highlights a broader cultural exchange, a theological tapestry stitched with threads from Alexandria, Byzantium, and the Sudanese interior. It's a visual echo of pilgrims and traders who carried ideas as eagerly as they carried salt and gold. The rhythmic pattern of hoofprints and halos starts to feel like a mantra, guiding your breath into slow, peaceful inhales and exhales. Your eyelids grow heavy, lulled by the repetitious grace of those painted beasts. You catch yourself thinking, maybe cows are the unsung saints of pastoral theology. Doesn't that sound like a great title for tomorrow's discussion thread? Despite the weighty symbolism, the mural feels familiar, comforting even. You realize that the cow's calm gaze anchors you amid the swirling abstractions of faith and power, reminding you that every theological debate eventually circles back to daily life. Feeding families, tending fields, and hoping for blessings from forces both seen and unseen. Whether these murals preached orthodoxy or heresy, or something delightfully in between, they offered congregations a tangible touchpoint. A creature they knew intimately, now elevated to a symbol of divine mystery. As you step away, the fresco dims behind you, but its message lingers. Faith is as adaptable as paint on plaster, and even the most ordinary beast can bear cosmic meaning. Maybe that's the real miracle of these 9th century cow murals. They coax the divine into everyday life, one gentle hoofbeat at a time. You step gingerly into a narrow annex where the plaster walls feel cool beneath your fingertips, and you realize you're standing inside the very workshop where 9th century Nubian artists concocted their vibrant cow murals. The air is tinged with the faint tang of crushed minerals and dried egg white, remnants of ancient tempura recipes that once flowed straight from bowl to brush. You probably didn't expect to find a medieval paint lab tucked behind a chapel, but here it is. Layered plaster, pigment bowls set on low benches, and a once polished stone mortar still stained with ochre. A mainstream historical fact grounds you: egg tempera was the dominant medium in Nubian Christian art of this era, inherited from Coptic traditions in Egypt, where artists mixed ground pigments with egg yolk and a touch of water to create fast-drying, luminous paints that clung to line plaster walls. Those methods traveled up the Nile with monastic scribes and bishops, ensuring stylistic continuity across Christian Africa. Historians still argue whether the recipes came directly from Alexandria or were adapted locally, but either way, you can almost feel the brushes whisper as it laid color onto fresh plaster. You crouch beside a shallow trough carved into the stone floor, once used to sift white gypsum plaster until it was smoother than silk. Artists would apply 3 to 4 thin layers of this plaster, each one drying before the next, creating a perfectly absorbent surface called a richo. Then, at the final intonaco layer, they worked swiftly, painting only as much as the plaster would absorb before setting, sometimes mere hours. This fresco a secco hybrid technique let them achieve crisp lines on cow outlines and delicate details like the flick of an eyelash or the curl of a tail. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Local lore holds that some painters added crushed insects like cochineal or kermes to redder pigments, believing the insect's lifeblood would imbue the cow images with protective magic. Pilgrims passing through centuries later claimed that the paintings occasionally attracted real insects, drawn by residual organic matter, leading monks to swat flies mid-prayer. Whether that's historical or just a fringe tale, it adds color to your image of a bustling workshop where sacred art and insect drama mingled. You brush imaginary fingertips along a series of small pits in the floor, evidence of where artists ground lapis lazuli, a luxury pigment imported from mines near Afghanistan. That ultramarine blue, reserved for heavenly skies and angelic robes, was too precious for everyday use, so Nubian painters used it sparingly. Perhaps to accentuate a cow's collar or frame a scroll-bearing angel. The deep blue would have glowed under torchlight, a visual exclamation mark in an otherwise earthen palette. As you rise, your eyes adjust to a set of wooden scaffolds propped against the far wall. You imagine painters in hooded tunics, balancing on those planks, brush in one hand and lamp in the other, working from dawn until dusk. Mainstream scholarship notes that these workshops likely operated on liturgical calendars. Fasting seasons, feast days, and royal visits dictated painting schedules. Artists paused work during Lent and launched new murals after Easter, filling churches with fresh color to mirror themes of resurrection. Historians still argue whether feast day acceleration compromised technique or inspired richer iconography under time pressure. A faded sketch lingers to one side, a preparatory cartoon of a cow-calf, charcoal lines flaking off the plaster. You kneel to trace its outline. A guideline for the final fresco, wondering if this was drawn by the master artist or an apprentice learning the craft. Workshop records are silent, but tradition suggests masters sketched key motifs, then delegated repetitive border patterns to novices. That division of labor explained variations in quality. Some cows boast elegant, sweeping curves, while others look more stilted, as if painted by sleepy hands. Your attention drifts to small alcoves where pigment recipes were once pinned on papyrus scraps, ingredients listed in demotic script, 1 part red ochre, 1/2 part white chalk, dash of egg white, scour in Nile water. You can almost imagine an artist weighing these out with wooden spoons, spitting on a finger to test consistency before laying it on plaster. That tactile process reminds you of the intimacy between painter and medium, a bond that modern historians still debate. Did local variations in water hardness and climate alter the original Coptic formulations significantly, or did artisans strictly adhere to imported treatises? You spot a shallow trough lined with porous pottery shards, once used to leach water from the pigment mix, ensuring no excess moisture weakened the plaster bond. Nearby, broken ceramic fragments reveal traces of plant-based binders. Gum arabic from acacia trees perhaps, or even donkeyhide glue, a quirk some say was used to make paints more flexible in fluctuating desert temperatures. That latter claim fuels a fringe debate. Historians still argue whether donkey glue binders were common or simply an exotic legend passed down in travelers' tales. Above you, a narrow shaft of sunlight bathes a golden chalice, a receptacle for gold leaf sheets used to highlight halos, cow horns, or ornamental scrollwork. Gold beaters would hammer the precious metal into leaves so thin you could read a prayer through them. You recall that the cow murals often featured flecks of gold on calves' flanks or along the edges of garlands, catching ambient light to suggest divine radiance. The expense of that gold meant only high-status chapels or royal commissions received such opulence, another reminder of the intricate dance between faith and power. Your gaze settles on a corner shelf where shallow bowls hold residues of natural earth pigments, yellow from Nubian sandstone quarries, verdant green from copper deposits in nearby wadis, and soft purple from manganese dioxide. Each hue told a story of the Nubian landscape, binding art to geography. Artisans ground these by hand in muller stones, sometimes for days, until particles were fine enough to transform into paint. That grindstone still lies here, grooves carved by generations of strokes, silent testimony to labor that bridged material and spiritual worlds. A gentle breeze whispers through a crack in the wall, stirring fine dust motes that dance around your head like flecks of pigment brought to life. You close your eyes and hear the imagined rasp of brushes on plaster, the muffled chants of monks reciting prayers as pigments dried, and the occasional murmur of a royal envoy tipping gold coins into the workshop's coffer. That soundscape anchors you to a moment frozen in time. As you prepare to leave, you notice a small carving near the exit, a stylized cow's head and the letters M.A., perhaps the initials of the master artisan, Macarius? Maybe Maria? We'll never know. Historians still argue whether these cryptic signatures belong to priests turned painters or to itinerant artists passing through the kingdom. That deliberate ambiguity lingers as you step back into the corridor, leaving behind the sweet, mineral-rich air of the workshop. You walk out, light from the main chapel spilling over your shoulders. Your mind hums with the tactile knowledge of plaster, pigment, and painstaking craft. Each painted cow you've passed now seems even more miraculous. Not just art, but alchemy, transforming humble earth and egg into a luminous testament of faith and culture. And as you glide onward toward the next mural-laden chamber, you carry with you a deeper appreciation for every brushstroke that once pulsed with life in this hidden atelier. You step into a sunlit transept where a mosaic of geometric patterns dances across the dais, and instantly you sense the desert's pulse, trade winds carrying gifts and rumors along sand-swept routes. Here, the painted cows stand alongside unfamiliar motifs, interlacing stars, stylized palm fronds, even cursive script that hints at distant markets. You probably didn't think a humble church fresco could double as a world map, but our 9th century Nubian painters were cartographers of culture, painting in everything they'd seen from Timbuktu caravans to Mediterranean merchant ships. A mainstream historical fact grounds you. By the 9th century, the trans-Saharan trade routes had matured into vital commercial arteries. Caravans carrying gold from the Bambuk mines, salt blocks from Tagaza, and exotic goods like ostrich feathers and ivory threaded through Nubia, connecting West African kingdoms to Mediterranean ports. Those same routes introduced precious pigments, orange-red cinabrio, vermilion, from Iberian alchemical workshops and malachite green shipped in ceramic jars from North African mines. Historians still argue whether these pigments arrived in raw mineral form or as pre-mixed powders from Abbasid apothecaries, but whichever way, their vibrant hues leap from sand dunes into sacred halls. As you lean closer, you notice a cow's flank bordered by a thin black line interwoven with tiny silver dots, an unfamiliar design reminiscent of Saharan Tuareg jewelry. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some local storytellers claim that wandering Tuareg artisans once stopped at these churches, teaching Nubian painters how to etch silver into plaster using powdered meteorite dust. Supposedly, those minute iron flecks made the dotted lines shimmer under moonlight, creating a starry night cow effect that had pilgrims gawking like they'd stumbled into a sky map. Whether meteoric or mythic, the tale adds a cosmic wink to your stroll. You trace a series of concentric circles painted behind a reclining calf, an artistic echo of Berber shield motifs used to ward off evil. Those circles weren't just decoration, they formed an apotropaic barrier against desert spirits. Historians still argue whether such motifs represented genuine cultural exchange or were later additions by itinerant artisans seeking new commissions. You can almost picture heated debates at Cairo conferences. One scholar waving a faded travel diary, another pointing to chemical analyses of plaster layers, each insisting their theory holds the key to Nubian art's transformation. Your fingertips hover above a patch of wall where lapis lazuli meets graphite-like lines that feel more Islamic than Coptic. This hybrid pattern, a flowing arabesque curling around a cow's horn, signals influences from Fatimid scribes in North Africa. A light joke pops into your head. Imagine a scribe accidentally dipping his pen in cow paint and declaring, "By the Prophet, this is the new royal hue." Mischief or not, that cross-pollination enriched Nubian iconography, reminding you that art, like a good stew, tastes better with a dash of surprise. You pivot to study a triangular border framing one mural, tiny camel caravans trudging beneath crescent moons. The motif's origins lie in Saharan caravan miniatures from Andalusian manuscripts, perhaps brought by traders who carried leather-bound codices instead of goats and dates. A fringe story claims some caravanners lit signal fires at church sites to guide later caravans, and inadvertently gave inspiration to fresco artists, who painted those glowing dots as if marking each camp on a pilgrim's map. You can almost hear someone grumble, "Stop messing with my mural, you direction-hungry trader." That cheeky image sticks in your mind. The material evidence fascinates you. Tiny fragments of Algerian ochre embedded in the plaster mortar, detectable only through thin section microscopy. Those ochre grains glint like breadcrumbs, revealing that painters scraped pigment off ceramics traded from North Africa. Historians still argue whether merchants brought pigments free of charge gifts to curry favor with royal patrons, or traded them outright, adding another layer of commerce to already complex political ties. You wonder if any merchant ever bartered a sack of salt for a cow portrait, salt being literally worth its weight in gold in some parts of the desert. Probably won't taste great on bread, but in this context, it's priceless. A sudden breeze rustles the fabric of your robe, if you'd brought one, reminding you that most pilgrims wore woolen cloaks dyed far from Nubia. The dyes were vivid. Crimson from Kermes insects raised on Mediterranean oaks, indigo packets from West African plantations, and even a rare saffron orange traded through Cairo bazaars. Pigment jars once sat on wooden shelves here, their labels scrawled in 3 languages, Old Nubian, Greek, and Arabic. That triptych of tongues underscores a broader debate. Historians still argue whether multilingual labeling indicates widespread literacy among workshop assistants or simply a practical measure for itinerant tradesmen yanking pigment at night. Your gaze shifts to a narrow frieze where gleaming ostrich feathers fan out behind a solemn cow figure. That motif derived from West African royal insignia, where feathers signaled rank and spiritual power. A light joke drifted through your mind. Picture a bored scribe dipping an ostrich feather into fresco plaster and thinking, well, if the cow's regal, might as well give it a plume. Fringe lore adds that each cilantro plant in nearby medicinal gardens was painted with powdered ostrich eggshells to boost fertility, much like the cow imagery aimed to secure blessings for herders. Fertility and frescoes, who knew they went hoof in hand? You notice the plaster texture changes subtly where these trade-inspired motifs appear. Slightly coarser where shell-ground Mediterranean pigments were mixed and smoother where local gypsum dominated. That variation hints at 2 teams of painters, one local, one itinerant, working side by side. Historians still argue whether itinerant artists overshadowed indigenous styles or collaborated harmoniously, blending foreign flair with Nubian sensibility. The lived reality likely fell somewhere in between, much like your own opinion. You're torn between calling it cultural imperialism or a creative mashup worthy of its own Netflix documentary. A faint echo drifts through, someone humming a tune that isn't quite Coptic nor Arabic, but something you can't name, as if a minstrel once sang while pigments dried. The memory of that song reminds you of the sensory collage these frescoes represent: flavor, color, sound, even scent. You inhale deeply, picturing spices once traded here: cumin, coriander, myrrh. Each grain perhaps dusting ancient robes or slipping into paint to imbue it with aromatic depth. That sensory layering reminds you of a modern art exhibit where you nibble on the installation. Spoiler: it's not always delicious. As you step back to survey the mural's full arc, the painted cows and desert motifs merge into a visual caravan, leading your eye along a route that spans continents. Camels segue into Christian crosses, stars melt into cowspots, and every line hums with stories of markets, monsoons, and missionary intrigue. You feel the desert's heartbeat under your boots, a reminder that trade is more than commerce. It's a conveyor belt of ideas, techniques, and beliefs that reshapes sacred spaces. You probably won't think of these murals as trade manifests, but here they are. A ledger of camel hoofprints, cow footprints, and merchant travelogues, all mapped onto cool church walls. The next time you sip salt in your tea or admire a cow print, remember that art and commerce have been hoof and hoof for centuries. And if a historian ever challenges your take, just smile and say, historians still argue whether these cows trampled tradition or gave it new pasture. Then tip your hat, figuratively, of course, and wander onward, the painted caravan guiding your dreams. You wander down a silent aisle flanked by slender columns carved with vine motifs, the hush broken only by your own soft footsteps and the distant drip of water from a leaky roof. Ahead is the monastic workshop, a long hall brightened by narrow windows that cast slanted rays across dusty work tables. Here, monks in hooded habits once gathered not for prayer but for partnership, scribe and painter side by side, their chants blending with the scratch of quills and the swish of brushes on parchment. You probably didn't picture a medieval monastery as a co-working space, but this was where theology met artistry, one cow fresco at a time. A mainstream historical fact anchors you: in 9th century Nubia, monasteries functioned as educational centers where monks studied scripture, copied manuscripts, and produced church art, making them hubs of both religious learning and creative production. Historians still argue whether these workshops prioritized scriptoria or fresco work when assigning labor, but evidence suggests many monastic complexes supported dual arts departments, with teams rotating between copying gospel texts and painting murals. You imagine monks swapping tasks at lunchtime, one moment illuminating a page, the next outlining cow hooves in earthen tones. As you step closer to a long wooden bench strewn with tools, you notice quill pens trimmed to various angles, used for delicate line work and miniature gospel illustrations. Nearby, a monk's stubby brush lies abandoned beside a cow sketch pinned to the wall. That sketch shows a plump bovine wearing a decorative harness, probably a draft cow, not a sacrificial ox, complete with tiny painted bells etched in silver leaf. A quirky tidbit springs to mind. Some workshop legends claim a mischievous novice swapped the bell design for a jingle pattern he'd seen on an itinerant musician's camel, causing a minor scandal when the abbot found tiny rhythmic dots dancing around every cow mural. Whether true or not, the anecdote highlights the playful undercurrent in an otherwise solemn space. Your fingers hover over a set of pigment bowls, one holds crushed yellow ochre, another dull red hematite, and a third a deep green derived from ground malachite. You dip a finger into the green, tasting a faint metallic tang, probably not recommended, and then wipe it off on your robe. That physicality reminds you that monks mixed pigments themselves, measuring ingredients according to recipes passed down orally or recorded in dusty notebooks. Historians still argue whether recipe books traveled with monks returning from Egyptian monasteries or were developed locally through trial and error, but each bowl reveals a lineage of experimentation and adaptation. You glance up at a series of fresco fragments leaning against the wall, preliminary panels from trial runs, perhaps. On one, a cow's eye is painted so lifelike it seems to follow you. On another, a tiny calf gambols among stylized reeds, rendered with carefree brushstrokes. These fragments might have been practice pieces or discarded by impatient masters unhappy with novice attempts. A light joke flits to mind. Imagine a monk sneaking out at night to retouch his failed calf, only to discover the next morning that the abbot had consecrated the practice panel as a divine draught, earning the novice an unexpected blessing. Above the workbench, a crudely drawn schedule lists feast days and production deadlines. A mural of the Nativity by Christmas, the Passion by Easter, and fresh cows for a royal visit marked in bold initials. That calendar demonstrates how monastic art aligned with liturgical rhythms, with each season demanding a new visual sermon on the walls. Historians still argue whether strict adherence to these calendars compromised artistic quality or inspired creative flourishes under time pressure, but standing here, you sense both urgency and devotion mingling in the air like in. You slip into a cool vestibule where the hushed glow of chapel lamps highlights splintered wooden boards nailed over a once vibrant mural. This hidden corner bears witness to fiery arguments over whether painting cows on church walls was pious devotion or heretical showmanship. You probably didn't expect to find theological controversies lurking behind cow frescoes, but in 9th century Nubia, iconoclasm simmered like embers under those painted hides. A mainstream historical fact anchors you. The wider Christian world faced iconoclastic waves in the 8th and 9th centuries, most notably in Byzantium, where emperors outlawed religious images twice, first in 726 and again around 814, declaring them gateways for idolatry. Nubian leaders watched these debates closely. Envoys traveled to Constantinople and Alexandria, reporting back on the fate of icons and shaping local ecclesiastical councils. Historians still argue whether Nubia adopted Byzantine iconoclasm wholesale or filtered it through indigenous sensibilities, but either way, these cows found themselves caught in the crossfire of doctrine. As you approach a scratched-over section where cows once grazed behind angelic hosts, you see crude graffiti, a cross slashed through a bovine form, a monk's protest etched in charcoal. You imagine that monk muttering, "Why stare at cows when you can stare at Christ?" And then grabbing a stick for illicit fresco defacement. A quirky tidbit emerges. Rumor has it that some protesters carried small cloth bags of lime to fling at murals during midnight vigils, hoping to bleach out offending bovine bits. They said lime washed sins off stone, too, though historians still debate whether this was genuine religious fervor or a mischievous prank by rival monastic factions. You lean closer to study chiseled traces of where the images were partially scraped away. The plaster beneath reveals earlier layers, faint outlines of crosses and geometric patterns, as if cow images were painted atop older icon-free designs. That layering suggests a back-and-forth tug-of-war, one generation painting cows, the next slapping them down, then the next restoring them under a more tolerant abbot. You probably won't think of fresco restoration as medieval politics, yet here, each patch of new plaster tells a story of shifting religious winds. In the faint torchlight, you spot a small alcove where a chipped inscription reads, "Nulla creatura excepto Christo veneranda," no creature is to be venerated except Christ. That Latin phrase hints at Coptic clergy educated abroad, who feared that depicting cows too lovingly risked idolatry. Historians still argue whether such inscriptions represent isolated edicts or reflect a broader council decision that never made it into surviving records. You can almost hear the hushed debates in monastic refectories, one side championing didactic imagery to teach the faithful, the other condemning any risk of worshipping painted beasts instead of the painted word. A light joke surfaces. Imagine a stern bishop arriving with a magnifying glass, inspecting each cow's muzzle for saintly virtue, and sighing, "If I wanted livestock, I'd visit the pasture." Fringe lore adds that during one particularly heated session, a visiting Syrian monk lobbed his ink pot at a fresco, announcing, "Let his spots be obscured," causing a colorful splatter that some later revered as divine commentary. Whether that actually happened or was a monk's tall tale, it underlines how combustible theological disputes could become. You step back to survey a damaged mural, cows standing beside a towering cross framed by swirling vines. Some vines are hacked away, leaving thorny stumps, as if iconoclasts aimed to sever any decorative flourish they deemed too sensuous. Yet other sections remain intact, perhaps protected by monks sympathetic to iconodual views who quietly reapplied pigment under cover of darkness. That clandestine repainting gives you chills, secret midnight missions of restoration, brushstrokes hidden beneath flickering candles, all in service of cow veneration. Your mind drifts to the open scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Nubian iconoclasm was driven by imported Byzantine edicts or emerged organically from local ascetic impulses, which often frowned upon any lavish church art. You picture desert hermits admonishing parish priests, warning that even painting a humble cow might open Pandora's pew. And you can almost taste the irony: cows, creatures of mud and dung, igniting debates typically reserved for gold-leaf Christ pantocrators. A quirky sparkle catches your eye. A smudge of bright vermilion in a scraped-away patch. Someone must have tried to restore a cow's tail, or maybe left a thumbprint in protest. That fingerprint reminds you that these theological battles were carried out not just in grand council halls but by individual hands, workers, novices, and maybe even curious pilgrims sneaking in to leave their mark. You probably won't think of a cow mural as participatory art, but in this vestibule, every chisel stroke and overspray of pigment speaks of personal conviction. You wander to a battered support column where scraps of pictorial manuals, tiny codices in Greek and Old Nubian, are pinned under glass. They illustrate acceptable animal forms in Christian art: doves, lambs, fish, but conspicuously omit cattle. You imagine scribes flipping through these manuals, checking box after box: cow? No. Lamb? Yes. That careful vetting underscores how even cows needed ecclesiastical approval before stepping onto holy walls. Historians still argue whether these manuals were imported from Byzantine workshops or compiled by Coptic theologians in Nubia, but either way, they set the parameters for acceptable iconography. Above the manuals, a tattered banner hangs, once a grand declaration: art is for edification, not amusement. Someone, likely an abbot, hoped to curb frivolous frescoes, yet the very presence of cows on church walls suggests the decree failed spectacularly. A light joke pops in your mind. Maybe the abbot had a secret fondness for cattle and kept the mural screens ajar at night. Who's to say? Your gaze lifts to a half-intact fresco where an angel gently strokes a cow's nose, an intimate moment so tender it feels like a whispered apology from the artist for any theological misstep. That softness amid controversy resonates. Even in heated debates, people still craved connection, beauty, and a relatable bridge to the divine. The debate over cow murals wasn't just about doctrine, it was about how faith feels in the gut and in the heart, not just in syllogisms and synods. You probably won't equate controversies over cow frescoes with modern art battles, but here they are, a medieval culture war fought with brushes and chisels instead of tweets and hashtags. Whether Nubian iconoclasm muted these bovine pilgrims or enhanced their mystique remains an open question. Historians still argue whether the scars on these walls mark victory for iconoclasts or the resilience of iconodules. As you slip out of the vestibule, leaving shadowed debates behind, you carry with you the sense that even a painted cow can spark a revolution of ideas. Imagine that the next time someone tells you art's power is overblown. Just remind them cows almost brought down a kingdom's church councils. Now, onward to the next hidden chamber, where more bovine stories await your curious gaze. You slip through a half-open archway into a dimly lit chamber, where the frescoed cows take on an almost mythical aura beneath pools of lantern light. Here, the walls hum with local legends that turned painted bovines into spirit guardians of church and flock alike. You probably didn't expect to find ghost stories in a place of worship, but in 9th century Nubia, faith and folklore danced together like cattle at a harvest festival. A mainstream historical fact grounds you: in many Nubian communities, Christianity fused with earlier indigenous beliefs, resulting in a syncretic spirituality where saints shared the stage with ancestral spirits. Historians still argue whether this syncretism helped or hindered missionary efforts. Some clergy feared it diluted the gospel, while others saw it as a bridge to new converts. Either way, these painted cows became conduits for whispers of those old beliefs, marrying Christian iconography with tribal lore. You crouch to examine a mural where a cow's visage morphs into an ethereal face surrounded by swirling ribbons of color. According to local legend, this was Marageb, the cow spirit guardian of the Nile's herds. Villagers claimed that on moonless nights, Marageb would step forth from the plaster, stalking the Nile's banks to ward off hyenas and marauders. Some said they heard the soft clink of painted bells echoing down the dark corridors, a spectral jingle that promised safety to any traveler wise enough to heed its warning. A quirky tidbit bubbles up: shepherds reported spotting phantom calves, faint, luminescent outlines only visible at dawn, dotting their real herds, as if the mural's offspring had wandered off to check on the living. Those sightings, passed down in hushed whispers, convinced many that the church walls were porous thresholds between worlds. Whether these apparitions were collective imagination or nocturnal gazers mistaking dew-laden cobwebs for ghost calves, the tales cemented the mural's place in local folklore. You stand and brush your palm lightly across a roe-deer-sized patch where the plaster's pigment glows faintly under the lantern's glow. Pilgrims would press their palms there, leaving behind the warmth of their skin so that the guardian cow's magic might seep into their bones. A light joke flits across your mind. Imagine generations of worshippers inadvertently creating a bovine keep-out sign with nothing but their fingerprints. But in their minds, each fragrant print was a plea for protection, a prayer for healthy calves, abundant milk, and safe passage across desert sands. Your gaze rises to reveal a series of small niches carved into the wall, each containing a crudely shaped clay cow figurine. Pilgrims deposited these offerings after receiving blessings, believing that the spirit painted on the wall could animate the clay forms to patrol real pastures. Historians still argue whether these figurines represent genuine devotional practice or opportunistic tourist trinkets from passing merchants. Either way, The combination of fresco and figurine created a multisensory shrine, sight, touch, and even sound as devotees tapped the clay cows to summon the guardian's favor. A mainstream theological note threads through. While official doctrine frowned on worshipping images, folk practice thrived in the margins. These clay cows stood alongside bread and oil offerings, creating a hybrid altar that coexisted uneasily with sanctioned liturgy. Historians still debate whether church authorities turned a blind eye or condemned these practices outright. Surviving canons offer contradictory stances, some forbidding creatures of clay in sanctuaries and others demanding rote silence on the matter. You lean in to observe carved initials in Old Nubian at the base of one niche. Nairi Bdob, Nairi the shepherd, and wonder about the person behind the mark. Perhaps Nairi was a herdsman who vowed to leave half his herd's milk for the guardian spirit if Monsignor Basilius cured his sick calf. The inscription gives a human heartbeat to the frescoes, a testament to personal stories woven into grand religious art. A quirky fringe story drifts to your mind. Some elders swore that on stormy nights, the painted cows would weep tears of resin. Tiny droplets that solidified on the floor like amber beads. Collectors sold these cow tears for good luck charms, believing they carried the guardian's power to protect households from lightning and plague. Scientific inquiry would later declare the droplets as resin from termite nests or sap seeping through cracks, but for centuries, many preferred the miracle narrative. You move on to a mural corner where a regal cow stares straight out, eyes inlaid with tiny bits of mica that glitter in torchlight. This cow, villagers said, was Dame Colna, patroness of childbirth. Pregnant women would press their bellies against the wall, coaxing Dame Colna to lend strength during labor. Historians still argue whether such practices influenced church policies on women's roles in liturgy or remained confined to domestic realms. You smile at the image of a mother-to-be leaning on a cow mural for courage, a scene that feels both ancient and timeless. Above Dame Colna's head, someone painted a narrow band of hieroglyph-like symbols, palm branches crossed with Ankh signs, melding pharaonic and Christian icons. That motif underscores how these legends stitch together layers of belief. The cow spirit guardian carried echoes of Hathor, the Egyptian bovine goddess, even as it bore a Christian halo. You probably won't think of early medieval Nubia as a land where Hathor's descendants grazed in church naves, but here the symbols conspired to keep her memory alive in new theological garments. Your footsteps echo softly as you spot another patch of custom. Families used to leave painted cowlicks, tufts of calf hair, tucked into wall crevices, believing the guardian cow would reward their flock's fidelity. That odd relic practice linked physical remnants to painted forms, making the mural feel like a living creature that shared in human joys and sorrows. Whether hair or mural, the boundary between material and divine blurred magnificently here. A playful thought enters your mind. Imagine a meddlesome goat herder sneaking in at night to swap cow hair for goat hair, tricking the guardian spirit into blessing the goats instead. No record confirms such capers, yet the possibility crackles with rogue humor, proof that folklore thrived on mischief as much as reverence. Your gaze settles on a final mural where a cow stands before a glowing cross, its spots arranged like constellations. Legend held that mapping one's own fortune to those dots could foretell auspicious days for plowing, planting, or pilgrimage. You probably won't whip out an astrolabe to read cow spots, but for many Nubians, these painted constellations guided life decisions as surely as church bells. As you turn to leave, you feel the weight of countless stories pressing in, personal vows, protective rituals, phantom calves, and resin tears, all swirling around images of painted cows. These local legends wove a tapestry of faith that stretched far beyond doctrinal lines, embedding the murals in daily lives and dreams. You step through the archway, your heart warmed by the knowledge that art can become myth, myth can become faith, and faith can paint itself on the walls of your imagination. You slip into a lofty alcove where the chapel vaults meet in a ribbed crown, and suddenly the painted cows before you feel less like static images and more like cultural chameleons, shifting forms that borrow from Egyptian, Byzantine, and Nubian traditions all at once. You probably didn't expect to find a single fresco that wore three artistic heritages like layers of robes, but here the cows stand as living bridges between worlds, their flanks inscribed with patterns that echo far-off lands. A mainstream historical fact anchors this moment. After Nubia's conversion in the 6th century, the kingdom maintained active ties with Byzantium and Egypt, importing religious texts, liturgical rites, and even ecclesiastical artists. Byzantine icon painters trained in Constantinople occasionally traveled to Dongola, bringing with them sophisticated compositional techniques, shading, perspective hints, and stylized drapery folds. Historians still argue whether these imported artists worked directly on Nubian walls or merely influenced local workshops through sketchbooks and oral teaching, but the visual parallels, such as the gently foreshortened cowheads, are unmistakable. You trudge forward on worn flagstones, toes catching on ridges smoothed by centuries of devout footsteps. Before you, a cow's neck is decorated with a Byzantine fret motif, interlocking meanders typically reserved for imperial mosaics. That fret's stark, rhythmic precision contrasts with the freehand swirl of Nubian spirals beneath, where local artisans carved stylized papyrus reeds into plaster and then painted them in earthy greens. The juxtaposition makes your head swivel. One moment you're gazing at a pattern you've seen in Hagia Sophia reconstructions, the next you're admiring flora plucked straight from the Nile Delta. Historians still argue whether local painters saw imported patterns as sacred templates or simply as fashionable designer motifs. You imagine a Nubian artist rifling through a Byzantine sketchbook, murmuring, I like this pattern, but let's add some papyrus for home. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some workshop legends claim that local artisans nicknamed the imported sketchbooks the Emperor's Coloring Book, teasing their patrons when Byzantine artists weren't looking. If true, that playful labeling reveals how cultural exchange can be equal parts admiration and appropriation, like borrowing a neighbor's plow but tweaking the blade for your own fields. Your eyes adjust to the shifting light as you approach a dramatic mural panel where a cow stands beneath a soaring arch painted in Coptic red and white, echoing the striped piers found in Egyptian church architecture. That arch frames the bovine figure like a royal portal, hinting at processional doors in Alexandria's famous hanging church. Yet above the arch, you spy a row of Nubian shields round, painted shields with central boss designs tucked into the mural's border. Those shields belong to local cavalry regiments, signifying martial prowess and divine protection. The shield's inclusion transforms the scene. This is no lifeless import but a living tapestry stitched with regional pride. You probably won't think of shields next to cows as a harmonious pairing, yet here they waltz together across plaster. That dance speaks to a broader phenomenon, syncretic artistry where sacred and secular symbols intertwined. Monks and artists borrowed imperial grandeur, fused it with local iconography, and delivered something distinctly Nubian. A mainstream note, syncretism also extended to liturgies. Services in Nubia sometimes featured hymns in Old Nubian dialect alongside Greek chanting. Historians still argue whether this bilingual worship unified diverse congregations or caused liturgical confusion, but visually, the harmony of form seems undeniable. You pause beneath a slanted shaft of sunlight to inspect a cow's flank decorated with stylized Coptic crosses, each arm ending in a teardrop motif more commonly seen in Egyptian textiles. That motif here curls around a Nubian cattle bell painted in ochre and edged with gold leaf. The bell's shape is local, but its detailing follows imported manuscript borders. That hybrid design feels like architectural mashup. Imagine a church built with a Roman basilica plan but topped with Sudanese mud brick mashrabias. A quirky fringe tale drifts into your mind. Storytellers claim that after one festival unveiling, a Nubian bishop presented the artist's Coptic-style borders as a gift to an Egyptian delegation, only for the Egyptians to return it, confused and asking, "Is this a cow or a cross?" The bishop reportedly laughed, saying, "It's both, of course." This anecdote, whether fact or fancy, captures how syncretism could bewilder outsiders while resonating perfectly at home. Your gaze shifts to a panel where a cow stands beneath a star-studded sky. The stars drawn in Byzantine gold dots, their precise placement mirroring constellations known in Greek astronomy. Yet the sky's deep blue was mixed locally, using indigo from West African trade and a hint of carbon black from burned camel bone, an earthy recipe unique to Nubian workshops. That pigment cocktail binds sky and earth, foreign knowledge and native resources, into one cohesive fresco. Historians still debate whether Nubian artists received astronomical training from Coptic teachers or simply copied celestial charts, but the effect is clear. These skies felt both familiar and wondrously exotic to worshippers. You trudge forward, brushing your sleeve against a low bench where fragments of mosaic tesserae lie scattered, leftover pieces from a nearby church that swapped fresco for floor mosaic. The tesserae include green glass imported from Syria, white marble carved in Alexandria, and local sandstone. Pilgrims later pressed these bits into plaster to repair cracks in the cow murals, embedding new cultural strata in older images. That reparative act is itself syncretic, a patchwork of materials and meanings, each repair a dialogue between past and present, local and foreign. A light joke drifts to your mind. Imagine a modern art curator exclaiming, "This fresco is a multicultural manifesto," while monks nod, shrug, and ask for goat milk in their tea. Yet beneath the humor, the mural's hybrid identity feels profoundly alive, an artwork that refuses to be pinned down to a single tradition. You lean in to read a tiny inscription in Greek, Taukainueta nuami kran upsilon beta omega nu, art of the Nubians. It's faint but legible, perhaps a stamp of pride by a visiting Byzantine craftsman who admired local flair. That signature suggests collaboration rather than near importation, skilled hands from different lands working elbow to elbow. Historians still argue whether these signatures signified equal partnership or an exotic flourish to impress patrons, but you feel the camaraderie in that subtle script. Your breath slows as you take in a final detail, a cow's eyelid painted with henna-style henna patterns typical of Nubian bridal art. That domestic motif, often applied on wedding days to bless the marital union, here blesses the congregation's daily bread. It's a small flourish, barely noticeable unless you know to look for it, a hidden callback for those privy to local customs. That interplay of private ritual and public display embodies syncretism at its most intimate. As you step back, the entire mural swirls into view. Cows draped in Byzantine finery, bordered by Egyptian arches, anchored by Nubian shields and bride's henna. This palette of forms reminds you that identity, like paint, blends and layers until it becomes something new. You probably won't wake tomorrow thinking of cow frescoes as the ultimate syncretic art, But here they stand as proof that faith, politics, and local tradition can merge seamlessly into a single luminous canvas, one that continues to speak across centuries. You turn toward the corridor exit, senses alight with the frisson of blended cultures. These painted cows aren't relics of a lost world, they're living testaments to how humans borrow, adapt, and create together. As you walk on, the echo of your footsteps feels like the final brushstroke on a fresco that refuses to stay confined, urging you onward toward the next chapter of Nubian Christian artistry. You emerge into a broad nave where flickering torches transform painted cows into dancing shadows, and you quickly realize these murals were more than static art. They set the stage for vibrant festival processions that wove fresco and flesh into a single pageant. You probably didn't picture medieval worshippers marching past cow murals like participants in a living play, but here in 9th century Nubia, church festivals turned holy days into a bovine parade of color, devotion, and community spirit. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene: Christian feast days Easter, Epiphany, and the Dormition of Mary were celebrated with grand processions in Nubian churches, featuring clergy in ornate vestments, incense-bearing acolytes, and congregants bearing icons. Historians still argue whether lay participation extended to ritual pageantry or remained confined to solemn liturgy, but evidence from travelogues and church records suggests villagers donned festival attire and joined the moving congregation, turning worship spaces into dynamic stages. You step into the courtyard, where villagers cluster around a makeshift wooden scaffold erected before a massive cow fresco. The scaffold is hung with garlands of palm fronds, marigolds, and bright textile strips dyed with local indigo and madder. You can almost feel the breeze stirring those streamers, a gentle, rhythmic rustle that syncs with the beating of drums. Monks chant Psalm 23 in Old Nubian, their deep voices resonating against stone, invoking the Lord as shepherd and guide. Themes perfectly mirrored by the surrounding bovine imagery. A light joke bubbles up, shepherd and cow. It's like the ultimate in-group reference, but for these worshippers, it felt deeply sacred. A quirky tidbit surfaces: some villages organized cow flank blessings, where farmers led a live calf adorned in painted hide patterns mimicking the mural along the procession route. The calf's fur was decorated with temporary, safe dyes matching the painted cows, and villagers gently tapped its flank with palm fronds, believed to transfer the mural's protective power to the living herd. Whether this practice was widespread or a local eccentricity remains debated. Historians still argue whether live animal rituals complemented fresco veneration or blurred lines between symbol and reality, but the image of a dyed calf trotting beneath frescoed cows is unforgettable. You weave through the crowd, catching glimpses of festival banners painted with cow motifs, triangular pennants showing grazing herds, and dotted borders echoing mural patterns. Carpenters and weavers collaborated for weeks to craft these, often passing designs from church floor sketches to textile wefts. That collaboration underscores how festival art extended beyond plaster. It spilled into fabric, wood, and even bread. Yes, bread. Bakers shaped loaves into miniature cow forms, complete with carved horns, presenting them on ornate platters as communion offerings. You probably won't think of sacramental bread as bovine, but here every element joined the festival's cow-centric theme. You pause beneath the largest mural, where a regal cow dons a wreath of jasper and carnelian, stones traded from Nubia's mines. During festival season, young women wove real jasper beads into wreaths they placed atop stock cows grazing in temple courtyards, mimicking the mural's design. That practice merged mural and life so seamlessly it's hard to tell where painting ended and reality began. Historians still argue whether these bead wreaths were pious recreations or folk caprice, but they undeniably strengthened communal bonds, herders and artisans united in seasonal celebration. Monks step forward, swinging censers of frankincense and myrrh. The incense smoke drifts over painted cows, scenting them with aromatic cloudscapes. Worshippers raise hands, shawls fluttering, as the smoke weaves through arches and settles on painted flanks. A light joke nudges your thoughts, angels up above must have sneezed, bless you, bovine. But the moment feels reverent, an olfactory tribute to art and faith entwined. The procession slows before a mural featuring a cow-calf drinking from a lily-petal chalice. A senior monk dips his brush into water blessed at the Nile's source, collected during a dawn vigil, and flicks droplets onto the mural's chalice, reenacting baptismal themes through cow imagery. Pilgrims jostle to catch the stray droplets, believing they carried healing properties. Fringe lore suggests some collected the drips and leaf cups for healing poultices, though medical texts later dismissed such cures as superstition. Historians still debate the extent of these ritual uses, but the interplay of liquid, mural, and miracle made for an immersive festival rite. Suddenly, drums pulse, a syncopation of framed drums and tambourines, each beat echoing off stone. Dancers emerge, women in skirts dyed with cowspot patterns and men wearing calfskin jerkin vests, their sandals kicking up dust. The dance forms mimic bovine movements, graceful, rocking steps, heads bobbing like grazing beasts. The choreography honors both the animals' earthly labor and their spiritual symbolism as providers of sustenance. You might chuckle at dancers pretending to chew cud, but for participants, it was a tribute to creation's rhythms, making the festival both playful and profound. You move with the dancers, your heartbeat quickening as the sun slants through colored glass windows, casting polychrome light across the murals. Faces glow orange, green, and violet, each hue momentarily altering the mural's appearance. The cows flicker through color shifts, appearing to breathe, to sway with the music. Those kaleidoscopic shifts blur the line between painted and living forms, turning static art into a living canvas for worship. A curious whisper threads through the crowd. Some believe that if you spun beneath the mural's largest cow 3 times while chanting a hymn, you'd inherit the animal's patience and resilience, qualities vital for surviving Nubia's harsh seasons. A quirky practice, sure, but early travelers' journals recount seeing twirling pilgrims, robes swirling like cowtails, eyes turned heavenward in hopeful reverie. Historians still argue whether these spinning rituals were spontaneous folk acts or formally sanctioned processional moves, but either way, they added a kinetic counterpoint to solemn worship. As midday light warms the nave, festival-goers gather for a communal meal laid out on long tables beneath cow murals. Platters of dried fish, flatbreads, goat cheese, and date cakes shaped like little bovines line the benches. Monks bless the meal with prayers, tapping cow-fettled bread loaves thrice before distributing them. The act knit art, feast, and fellowship into a single celebration, an ancient potluck under the watchful eyes of painted cows. A senior bishop, draped in a robe patterned with tiny cow silhouettes, strides to the front. He raises a gilded crozier topped with a cow skull motif, an austere echo of the mural's rich color. His sermon weaves scripture with cow lore, comparing believers to calves led by the Good Shepherd to lush pastures. You catch a modern echo in his words, "Feed the flock, and they shall feed your faith." Historians still argue whether such agrarian analogies were standard in Nubian sermons or unique flourishes for festival homilies, but the power of metaphor here is undeniable. As the sun dips low, the procession winds down. Torches dim, banners are gathered, dancers rest, and villagers fade into shadows. Painted cows, now bathed in soft twilight, seem to exhale after their long pageant. The murals hold the memory of song, scent, and movement, silent yet suffused with the vibrations of festival life. You probably won't think of cows as party hosts, but in this Nubian tradition, they were at the center of communal joy, devotion, and continuity. Festivals weren't mere spectacles. They were living prayers, bound to the painted walls and hammered into the hearts of all who marched past those cow frescoes. As you step into the cooling evening air, you feel the lingering hum of drums and chants, a whispered promise that even painted beasts can come alive when faith and festivity collide. You slip down a slender spiral stair tucked behind a side altar, the far-off echo of festival drums dimming into a gentle murmur, and emerge into a quiet corridor lined with pilgrims' graffiti. Here, beside faded cow murals, ordinary worshippers etched prayers and names into the plaster, small acts of devotion that turned walls into collective memory books. You probably didn't think scratched initials could speak louder than painted frescoes, but in 9th century Nubia, every pilgrim left a trace. A mainstream historical fact grounds you. Pilgrim inscriptions are common in medieval churches across Africa and the Near East, where visitors carved names, dates, and prayers into stone or plaster to mark their passage and petition saints for intercession. Historians still argue whether these inscriptions served primarily as votive offerings or as practical waypoints for travelers navigating vast rural landscapes, but either way, they humanize sacred spaces in ways murals cannot. As you step closer, you see Amara Bia Tobias scratched beneath a miniature cow's head, followed by a plea, "Grant me safe passage to Dongola's market." That simple request evokes a world where travel was perilous. Robber bands roamed the desert, and Nile cataracts could capsize boats in a trice. Pilgrims sought divine protection, and what better guardian than a painted cow linked to both local spirits and Christian iconography? A quirky tidbit drifts through your mind. Some inscriptions included crude sketches of offering bowls beside cow heads, a kind of medieval emoji indicating that a gift of oil or grain awaited local church keepers. Travelers believed leaving such symbols ensured their offerings reached the right recipients, combining image and text in a shorthand that required no official script. It's a vivid reminder that for many, faith was practical, a trade in prayers and provisions. Your fingertips brush over chipped plaster where someone later attempted to erase graffiti deemed irreverent. A half-erased inscription reads, "May the cow teach me patience," perhaps seen as too whimsical by austere clergy. Historians still debate whether church authorities actively scrubbed pilgrim carvings or simply allowed time and moisture to do the work, but the uneven erasure pattern suggests selective cleaning rather than natural decay. You move on to a postern door, its lintel bearing a tiny cow sketch accompanied by an arrow pointing outward. Pilgrims likely used this marker to find the route to nearby herders' camps or water sources. That practical use of religious imagery underscores how churches doubled as way stations, where painted cows guided both spiritual and literal journeys. You chuckle at the thought of a pilgrim stopping a monk in the nave, asking, "Father, does this cow point to the well or the cattle pens?" A mainstream theological note emerges. While church doctrine focused on scripture and relic veneration, local practices blurred boundaries between sacred art and functional signage. Historians still argue whether such dual use compromised liturgical purity or enhanced churches' role as community hubs, but here the evidence is plain: faith and everyday life were inseparable. You crouch to examine a set of tiny crosses carved below a standing cow motif. Marks made by pilgrims who prayed for healing. Each cross likely represents a petition for physical relief: an ailing child, a wounded soldier, or perhaps a herder bitten by a scorpion. In some cases, visitors later returned to carve a small star beside their cross, indicating gratitude for answered prayers. Those thank you stars form a constellation of hope beneath the painted cows. A quirky fringe story whispers in your ear. Local legend held that if you traced your healing name cross 3 times counterclockwise around a cow's hoofprint, the cow spirit guardian would carry your petition directly to the Archangel Michael. Pilgrims swore by this ritual, even if later scholars labeled it folk superstition. Historians still argue whether such rites were genuine expressions of devotion or opportunistic inventions by guidemongers selling miracle kits, but inscriptions suggest many took them seriously. Your gaze drifts upward to a narrow clerestory window carved with a cowine cross motif, a deliberate architectural echo of the frescoes below. That repetition signals the cow's enduring significance in Nubian Christian identity, bridging wall art and structural design. It's easy to overlook a tiny window carving, yet it reinforces the mural's themes in stone, daylight, and shadow. You step into an adjoining chamber where a stone bench bears dozens of initials and symbols carved by pilgrims seeking rest and reflection. Among the carven names, you spot Miriam B. Samuel beside a small cow outline accented with red pigment, perhaps added later by a novice wishing to enliven the inscription. That red spot reminds you that pilgrim graffiti could be collaborative. Early travelers scratched initials, and subsequent visitors colored them or added embellishments, creating a layered tapestry of devotion. A mainstream cultural note surfaces: graffiti in medieval sacred spaces can reveal social networks, literacy levels, and devotional practices that formal records overlook. Historians still debate whether graffiti should be considered part of the official sacred narrative or dismissed as marginalia, but here the messages matter. They show how everyday people interacted with art and faith. You pause at a larger carving, a stylized cow flanked by 2 crescent moons and 3 stars. The moons point skyward, as if urging viewers to look beyond earthly fields to cosmic cycles. Pilgrims may have invoked celestial patterns when marking fasting days or planning harvests, blending agricultural calendars with lunar observations. That synthesis of cosmic, agricultural, and spiritual rhythms felt essential in a kingdom dependent on Nile floods and star-guided seasons. A quirky detail catches your eye: some pilgrim names are accompanied by small ladder symbols, likely signifying spiritual ascent, a common motif in Coptic Christian art. By placing a ladder next to a cow's head, travelers expressed the hope that mundane devotion, represented by the cow, could lift them toward divine communion. Ladder and cow symbolism might have seemed odd to theologians, yet to pilgrims, it captured faith's practical and mystical dimensions in one image. Your footsteps echo as you approach a section where the plaster is so worn that only deep incisions remain. Archaeologists later interpreted these as ritual tap marks, where pilgrims struck the wall with walking sticks, leaving rhythmic patterns around cow hoofprints. That tapping was said to awaken the mural's protective power, much like drumming animates a spirit. Historians still argue whether tap marks were conscious rituals or the byproduct of travelers leaning on walls for support, but the regularity of patterns suggests deliberate practice. You reach the corridor's end at a small niche containing a handful of broken pilgrim tokens, bits of pottery, scraps of cloth, and tiny beads, all wedged into cracks beside a painted cow's ear. These tokens formed an impromptu offering box, where pilgrims left gifts to thank the cow murals for guidance or healing. The variety of materials, ceramic sherds from cooking pots, textile scraps from travelers' cloaks, and seed beads from local headdresses, reflects the diversity of pilgrims passing through, farmers, merchants, and even soldiers headed to the frontier. A mainstream economic note ties in: pilgrim offerings could supplement church coffers, funding repairs or alms for the poor. Historians still debate whether graffiti and token deposits were primarily devotional or transactional, essentially a medieval tip jar, but either way, these acts underwrote the church's social role. You stand back and admire the corridor's layers: fresco, graffiti, carvings, and tokens intertwine into a palimpsest of devotion. Painted cows, once the exclusive domain of royal and clerical patrons, here become the focal point of communal faith. Accessible to everyone who pass through these halls. The walls whisper voices across centuries: I prayed here, I believed, I left my mark. It's a humble chorus, yet powerfully resonant. You probably won't think of carved initials as pilgrimage diaries, but here they form a living chronicle of human hope, fear, and connection. As you step into brighter light again, the corridor's hush follows you, a reminder that faith's grandest statements often emerge in the smallest gestures. A name scratched in plaster, a cow's ear traced by a trembling finger. Those voices have carried their stories onward, just as you carry them now, into the wider world. You pass through a crumbling arch into the church's rear transept, where the frescoed cows stand battered by centuries of sun, sand, and moisture, a testaments to time's relentless march. Your fingertips hover near flakes of pigment peeling away, and you feel a tug of sorrow for these once vibrant images now on the brink of oblivion. Preservation here was never an afterthought, it was a battle against elements and neglect, fought by caretakers who understood that every chip risked severing the link between the past and your own present. A mainstream historical fact anchors you. Many Nubian churches fell into disrepair after the kingdom's decline in the 14th century, as shifting trade routes and political upheavals left sacred sites vulnerable to desert encroachment. Historians still argue whether local communities prioritized maintaining these murals or focused resources on living congregations elsewhere, but the uneven state of preservation speaks volumes. Some walls hold near intact images, while others are reduced to ghostly outlines. You crouch to examine a patch of white efflorescence, salt crystals pushed to the surface by rising groundwater, a slow but deadly process known as saltpeter damage. Pilgrims centuries ago might have scooped the crystals into their hands, believing them holy relics, unaware that those same crystals were devouring the plaster beneath their fingers. You probably won't think of pilgrimage souvenirs as destructive agents, yet here the human need to touch history contributed, in small ways, to its unraveling. A quirky tidbit surfaces. One 19th century traveler noted in his journal that local children used fallen plaster chips as chalk for writing on school slates, inadvertently dispersing the murals further into the community. Those chalk lines, scrawled with lessons and doodles, tied the fresco fragments to new generations. Education born from art's decay. Historians still debate whether this practice reflects cultural continuity or tragic loss, but it underlines how artifacts can be both foundation and fodder for future life. Your gaze lifts to a high window where a crow's nest of starlings has nested in a gap between stone blocks. Their droppings streak the wall in dark patterns, corroding pigments with acidic wear. a light joke crosses your mind. Imagine the cows complaining, "Couldn't they have built us a bird feeder instead?" But beneath the humor is a serious struggle. Caretakers in the 19th and early 20th centuries attempted makeshift repairs, coating walls with linseed oil or lime washes that often trapped moisture and accelerated deterioration. Those well-meaning interventions reveal how preservation knowledge has evolved and how past errors complicate current restoration efforts. You step closer to a section stabilized by modern conservators, a sleek silicone barrier injected into plaster voids, now belying its age as yellowed silicone peeks through cracks. That intervention, carried out in the 1970s, saved portions of the mural but also introduced non-breathable material that sometimes darkens rather than protects. Historians and conservators still argue whether such quick fixes did more harm than good, but without them, entire scenes might have vanished. You feel the tension between urgency and restraint, too slow, and the frescoes lose integrity, too hasty, and restorers risk harming the very art they aim to preserve. A mainstream note of diplomatic nuance arises. Preservation projects on Nubian sites have often depended on funding from foreign missions, European universities, American NGOs, even UNESCO, but those efforts sometimes sideline local voices. Historians still debate whether international teams imposed Western conservation models that clashed with Nubian environmental realities. You imagine a heated meeting where a foreign conservator insisted on chemical consolidants, while local elders argued for traditional limeplaster repairs brewed from the same Nile silt that painters used centuries ago. The debate underscores that preservation is as much political as technical. You notice a discreet plaque crediting a recent joint project between the Sudanese Department of Antiquities and an Italian conservation team. Beneath it lies a small trough collecting dripping roof water, a leaky skylight funneling rain into the transept. That vulnerability reminds you that climate change now exacerbates preservation challenges. Heavier seasonal rains and shifting flood patterns threaten to inundate low-lying churches, while rising temperatures accelerate salt crystallization. Historians still argue how best to adapt conservation strategies to these new conditions, but the urgency is undeniable. Your finger traces the edge of a removed panel where restorers extracted a cow fragment for study in a museum abroad. That fragment gleams under protective glass in a distant gallery, far from its original context and companion murals. A quirky complaint arises. Museumgoers marvel at painted cow anatomy without a sense of the fresco's larger theological and social meaning. Yet without such extractions, researchers couldn't analyze pigment composition or crisscross trade route evidence. Historians still debate repatriation. Should these fragments return to crumbling walls or stay where controlled conditions guarantee their survival? The question holds no easy answer. A damp spot catches your eye, a greenish-blue bloom feeding on retained moisture around a blocked drainage channel. Algae and mold quietly eat at the plaster's surface, often undermining pigment adhesion. Conservators now use biocides sparingly, knowing that chemicals can stain or alter hues. You probably won't celebrate mold-killing chemicals, but here they preserve what generations of monks, kings, and pilgrims once revered. You step back to view a small protective awning recently installed by heritage authorities. Made of corrugated metal, it feels out of place against ancient stone, yet it shields the wall from direct sun and rain. That pragmatic addition sparks a debate. Historians still argue whether visible modern interventions detract from authenticity or provide necessary safeguards. Authenticity versus visibility, a trade-off echoing the larger theme of these cow murals, where faith, politics and practicality constantly negotiate. A faint echo of a conservator's voice drifts in your mind. We must document every crack before it widens. You imagine detailed condition reports, plaster samples labeled in neat plastic bags, and digital photogrammetry mapping each flake. That technical rigor contrasts sharply with earlier eras when local caretakers simply patched walls with mud plaster and hoped for the best. Both approaches reflect their moment's knowledge and values. Your gaze returns to a small boy, perhaps 10 years old, sitting in the corner and tracing cow outlines in the dirt with a stick. He's the great-grandson of a caretaker and wears a shirt stamped with a faded logo of an archaeological mission. In his eyes, the cows are as alive now as they were when last painted. He giggles as he creates a little herd in the dust, unconcerned by salts, scoria, or silicone. For him, these images are not relics but living companions. Friends in his lonely corner of the world. You probably won't think of preservation as a human story, but here it is, a tapestry of errors and ingenuity, neglect and devotion, tradition and innovation. Each crack sealed, each pigment analyzed, each panel removed or protected, weaves into the larger narrative of these cow murals. They're not frozen artifacts but ongoing projects, as alive and fragile as history itself. As you prepare to leave the transept, you sense the cow's painted eyes watching you, as if begging for further care. You step into the hot afternoon sun, dusty wind whisking across your cheeks. The church stands half in ruin and half in rebirth, mirroring the mural's fate, endangered yet cherished, faded yet luminous. And you carry that duality with you, the promise of preservation entwined with the inevitability of change. You emerge into the bright glare of midday, stepping onto dry earth where an international team has set up scaffolding and digital scanners against the church's western facade. Here, waves of rediscovery have rippled through the last 2 centuries, transforming faded fresco fragments into scholarly focal points. You probably didn't expect the painted cows to attract laser beams and laptop screens, but modern archaeologists treat these murals as keys to unlocking lost worlds. And they've brought every tool imaginable to the task. A mainstream historical fact grounds you. The first systematic documentation of Nubian church art began in the early 19th century when European explorers like Johann Ludwig Burckhardt sketched murals and recorded inscriptions, sparking academic interest in medieval African Christianity. Subsequent expeditions, German, British, Italian, and later Sudanese, map sites, photographed walls, and collected plaster samples for pigment analysis. Historians still argue whether early studies prioritized European agendas or laid critical groundwork for future preservation, but no one disputes their role in putting Nubian murals on the global map. You sidestep a network of tripods and tripod-mounted 3D scanners humming softly as they capture every contour of cracked plaster. Digital photogrammetry allows researchers to create virtual reconstructions of the cow frescoes, enabling the public to walk through these spaces in high resolution. A quirky tidbit surfaces. One scanning team jokingly named their 3D reconstruction CowVR, equipping the project with cow sound effects to make virtual visits more immersive, moo echoes and all. Whether that added value or just amused the programmers, it highlights the blend of high-tech and high-church humor driving rediscovery efforts. You pass a table strewn with pigment samples labeled in neat handwriting. Sample 12A, yellow ochre, Nubian. Sample 27B, lapis lazuli, Afghan. Chemists pore over these under portable spectrometers, teasing out chemical signatures that map trade routes of minerals and binders. Historians still argue whether pigment sourcing can definitively trace merchant networks or only suggest probable connections, but each data point layers new insights atop centuries-old paint. Ahead, a team of Sudanese students crouches beside a carved lintel, manually tracing faint inscriptions with infrared reflectography. Their findings reveal hidden sketches beneath the visible murals, preliminary cow outlines erased by later restorers. That discovery fueled a recent scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether those underdrawings represent abandoned iconographic experiments or corrections by original artists striving for perfection. You imagine heated conference panels where advocates brandish infrared images like evidence exhibits, each insisting their interpretation honors the mural's true authors. You step back to admire a life-size projection of the mural, displayed on a temporary screen. The projection glows with restored color. Vibrant ochres, fresh greens, and glowing gold, offering a tantalizing glimpse of how the chapel might have appeared fully adorned. A light joke drifts to your mind. Imagine monks returning to their frescoes, blinking at the neon glow and exclaiming, "Did we really paint cows that bright?" But the projection is more than spectacle. It invites both scholars and locals to reconnect with a vanished aesthetic, bridging centuries with light and pixels. Nearby, an exhibit of archival photographs shows the same wall in 1912, when desert sands lapped at its base. Those black and white images reveal cows nearly submerged in drifting dunes, testament to how the church was once swallowed by nature's relentless advance. Comparing them to today's stabilized site sparks reflection on preservation's impact. Historians still argue whether archaeological stabilization unwittingly alters the ambience of ruin, preserving form but erasing the poetic decay that once defined these walls. You approach a makeshift lecture area where a visiting PhD candidate from Khartoum University presents her thesis. She's charted variations in cow muzzle shapes across 10 churches, arguing they correspond to regional cattle breeds and seasonal variations in pastoral cycles. Her work draws from ethnographic interviews with local herders who still recognize those muzzle patterns. Historians still debate whether such ethnographic links are valid for medieval art, but her melding of oral history and mural analysis feels refreshingly grounded in lived memory. Glancing past the students, you glimpse a drone silently hovering near the roofline, capturing overhead imagery that reveals structural shifts in the chapel walls. Engineers will use the data to model stress points and design unobtrusive supports. A quirky tidbit arises: local drone pilots nicknamed their UAV Mubot, fitting given its mission to map cow frescoes. Whether Mubot ever responded to bovine puns, the drone underscores how rediscovery blends grassroots creativity with serious engineering. You move to a portable field lab where conservators test consolidants on plaster fragments, balancing long-term stability against color alteration. They debate vigorously whether modern synthetic resins or traditional lime-based mortars better honor the mural's material authenticity. Historians still argue which approach aligns with UNESCO guidelines and local environmental conditions, but each trial, tiny test panels label A, B, and C contributes to an emergent best practice. A corridor away, a small pop-up gallery features community-curated photo collages of local descendants visiting the church. Children dressed in traditional Nubian attire stand before the murals, beaming as they point to their names scratched centuries ago. That living component reminds you that rediscovery isn't only academic, it's social and cultural renewal. A mainstream cultural note: recent heritage projects in Nubia emphasize community engagement, training locals as site guides and co-researchers. Historians still debate the balance between expert-driven science and grassroots stewardship, but the smiling faces in the gallery make the case for inclusive scholarship compelling. As you loop back toward the entrance, you pass a table where a recent monograph lies open, Cow Murals of Nubia, Patrons, Painters, Pilgrims. Its pages teem with close-up photographs, pigment charts, and annotated maps. You flip through and note a passage highlighted in neon pen. These murals serve as visual palimpsests, chronicling layers of devotion, politics, and trade. That phrase captures the essence of rediscovery. Each new layer of research uncovers yet another story beneath the paint. You probably won't think of cows as high-tech research subjects, but here they're at the forefront of digital heritage, multidisciplinary scholarship, and local empowerment. Rediscovery weaves lasers, drones, pH tests, and community tales into a tapestry as intricate as the original frescoes. As you step back into the sun-washed courtyard, the scaffolding looms behind you, a skeletal echo of the church's ribs and the ongoing effort to resurrect these painted cows from the sands of oblivion. You step through a low wooden doorway into a modern courtyard where echoes of ancient frescoes meet the hum of tourist chatter and camera shutters. Painted cows that once guided worshippers now pose for selfies, their faded hues amplified on smartphone screens and travel blogs. You probably didn't expect 9th century cow murals to become Instagram stars, but today they anchor a burgeoning heritage scene where locals and visitors alike reclaim Nubia's Christian past as a source of pride and identity. A mainstream historical fact grounds you. In recent decades, the Sudanese government and international NGOs have promoted Nubian heritage through cultural festivals, museum exhibitions, and school curricula, spotlighting medieval church art as a symbol of national diversity and resilience. Historians still argue whether state-driven heritage initiatives risk commodifying sacred sites or foster genuine community engagement, but here in the courtyard, you see both souvenir stalls and young guides earnestly explaining fresco stories to awestruck visitors. You wander past a line of stalls selling cow-patterned textiles, scarves, bags, and purses printed with stylized mural motifs. Artisans sell them alongside postcards depicting close-ups of cow eyes flecked with gold leaf. A quirky tidbit surfaces. One entrepreneur jokingly named his textile line Modern Nubia, riffing on the mural's bovine flair while marketing a playful, modern twist. Whether such puns delight or distract, they reflect how heritage commerce weaves humor into cultural revival. Your gaze lifts to a group of Nubian elders seated under a shaded canopy, their laughter punctuating explanations of local legends to schoolchildren on a field trip. One elder, her silver hair tied in a bright headscarf, recounts how her grandmother taught her to trace cow outlines in the sand before reading Bible stories. That living memory underscores a mainstream cultural note. Oral traditions preserve mural meanings across generations, maintaining a continuum from monastic chapel to community courtyard. Historians still debate the balance between written records and oral history in reconstructing the past, but here the two blend seamlessly. You stroll toward a pop-up performance space where a local music troupe performs ancient Coptic hymns on reed flutes and hand drums. As notes swirl in warm afternoon air, a dancer in a cowspot-patterned skirt interprets the music through flowing, cow-like sways and gentle head nods, echoing pastoral imagery in living form. A light joke flits through your mind. This is what Beyoncé's Single Lady looks like in Nubia, but the performance feels sincere. A reclamation of ancient themes through contemporary creativity. Nearby, a small community gallery displays modern paintings inspired by the frescoes, abstract cow forms overlaid with Arabic calligraphy, digital mashups that combine mural fragments with satellite images of the Nile. A quirky fringe observation emerges. One mixed media canvas features anachronistic details, cow murals punctuated by pixelated QR codes, inviting viewers to scan for audio narratives. Historians still argue whether such digital reinterpretations honor or dilute medieval heritage, but the innovation sparks conversations across age groups. You pause at a guided tour group clustered before a newly installed interpretive panel. It explains how Nubian Christian art reflects a unique blend of African, Middle Eastern, and Mediterranean influences. A modern photograph compares a decorated cow fresco with a brass cowbell from a 21st century herder's herd, showing how cow symbolism remains potent in local culture. That continuity highlights a mainstream anthropological point. Symbols persist when they resonate deeply with communal identity. Historians still debate how much medieval murals influenced contemporary Nubian art forms versus how both draw on a shared pastoral heritage, but the parallels are clear. A young guide invites you to sign a visitor's book, where travelers leave comments and sketches inspired by the murals. You open the book to see messages in Amharic, English, French, and one doodle of a cow wearing sunglasses. You laugh, modern visitors reimagining ancient cows as hip tourists, yet the humor feels respectful, like a nod across time that says, "We see you, and we love you." Your ears catch the distant toll of a community bell recently restored using funds from heritage grants. The bell's chime mirrors ancient calls to worship, linking medieval liturgy to modern communal gatherings. A light-hearted thought surfaces. Imagine a medieval cow mural suddenly mooing back when the bell rings, anachronistic but delightfully fitting. In reality, the bell invites locals to evening prayers and weekend cultural events held under the frescoed walls. You move toward a small cafe set up against the church's exterior wall, where baristas serve Nile cappuccino topped with latte art mimicking mural patterns. Tourists sip cappuccinos as they scroll through augmented reality apps that overlay reconstructions of missing fresco segments onto the surviving walls. A quirky fringe observation. One app feature lets you virtually paint your own cow in the color palette of 9th century tempera. Whether that counts as vandalism or participatory art remains debated. Historians still argue whether interactive tech enhances or trivializes heritage, but you can't deny its appeal. You step back to watch as children in school uniforms sketch cow murals on portable easels, their hands shaking with concentration. A teacher encourages them, "Remember, these cows connect us to our past and guide us toward our future." That sentiment echoes a broader mainstream note. Heritage education helps younger generations understand and protect their cultural patrimony. Historians still discuss the best pedagogical approaches, immersive experiences versus textbook lessons. But here, children learn by doing. Finally, you stand under the evening sky as the courtyard lights up. Projectors cast soft glows onto the church walls, highlighting cow fresco details long hidden by shadow. A local spoken word poet recites lines about desert winds and painted beasts, weaving ancient themes into contemporary verse. You probably won't equate cow murals with slam poetry, but tonight they fuse into a living performance that celebrates continuity and change. As you leave the courtyard, the cow frescoes seem less like static artifacts and more like living participants in a story that stretches from monastic workshops to global digital platforms. Modern resonances hum with commerce, creativity, and communal pride, testament to the mural's enduring power to inspire. You step into the dusk, the echo of poetry and music following you home, a reminder that painted cows once meant to guard herds now guard cultural memory. And invite everyone to join the herd of storytellers. Word count, 1006, Section 15. You exit the courtyard into a nearby grove where acacia trees sway against a twilight sky, and you pause to contemplate the cows whose painted forms have outlived empires, trade routes, and even the Nile's own rhythms. These murals began as devotional images and became political symbols, workshop experiments, folk talismans, contested icons, rediscovered treasures, and modern heritage markers. You probably didn't think cow frescoes could carry such weighty legacies, but here their painted hides bear the imprint of centuries, an enduring testament to art's power to transcend time. A mainstream historical fact anchors this reflection. Art historians recognize Nubian murals as a rare repository of medieval African Christian art, distinct from European and Byzantine traditions largely due to their integration of local cultural elements. Museums worldwide now include Nubian fragments in exhibitions on medieval art, while academic curricula highlight them in discussions of cross-cultural exchange. Historians still argue whether these murals should redefine global medieval art narratives or remain studied primarily within African and Coptic circles, but their inclusion signals growing recognition of Africa's role in shaping Christian visual culture. You lean against a tree trunk and picture the fresco's original chapel. Walls aglow with tempera, punctuated by gold leaf and lapis lazuli, bathed in flickering torchlight and enveloped in incense-scented air. That sensory memory speaks to an artistic legacy. These murals taught visual literacy to congregations, conveying complex theological and social messages through familiar images of cows and pastoral life. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some modern art educators use cow murals as case studies in cross-disciplinary courses, pairing them with lessons in chemistry, theology, and anthropology. You might chuckle at art history meets chemistry lab, but the pairing underscores how these images continue to educate. Your gaze drifts upward toward a wandering goat silhouetted against the darkening sky, nature's unpainted creature echoing the mural's bovine forms. You imagine monks mixing pigments in workshops where evening stars guided their hands, children carving graffiti in corridors, and pilgrims pressing their prayers into plaster. That marathon of creative and devotional acts weaves an artistic legacy that survives in every stray brushstroke and chiseled name. A scholarly debate threads through this legacy. Art historians still argue whether Nubian muralists were innovators crafting a unique regional school or skilled adapters melding external influences. You see the answer in each painted cow. Some embody bold experimentation, those with silver-dotted lines and meteorite-infused glints, while others neatly follow imported templates. The legacy, then, is dual, one of originality and one of synthesis, demonstrating creativity's two faces. You close your eyes and inhale the evening breeze, recalling the scent of crushed ochre and egg tempera in monastic ateliers. That sensory echo highlights how materials themselves become part of artistic legacy, techniques passed through apprenticeships, pigment sources charted in trade logs, and binder recipes debated in council chambers. Conservators today still reconstruct these recipes, reviving ancient palettes and enabling contemporary artists to experiment with historic methods. Historians still argue whether revived techniques should replicate original intentions or embrace modern innovation, but either way, the material legacy lives on in restored frescoes and experimental studios alike. Your thoughts drift to a gallery opening you attended in Khartoum, where a Nubian-born painter unveiled a series of large canvases reimagining cow murals as abstract forms. The work spanned decades of research and personal reflection, affirming that the cow's legacy extends into new artistic languages. A light joke pops into your mind. Imagine a cow mural turning into a Pollock-style drip painting, cow splatter in C major, but the serious point remains. These images inspire creativity across centuries and styles. You scan the horizon for the church silhouette you left behind, its ruins etched against a rising moon. You think of the countless pilgrims who pressed hands to cow flanks for blessings, the monks who debated iconoclasm by lantern light, the traders who carried pigments across deserts, and the scholars who scan walls with lasers. All these acts converge in a living legacy, one that continues to invite interpretation and participation. A mainstream cultural note resonates. Heritage organizations now host annual cow mural days, bringing together scholars, artisans, and community members to celebrate medieval art through workshops, performances, and conservation demonstrations. Historians still debate the commercialization of such events versus their role in community building, but the festivals draw growing crowds, a testament to the mural's capacity to unite. People dance, paint, learn pigments, and share stories, forming a new layer in the cow's cultural palimpsest. You probably won't think of medieval cow frescoes as catalysts for contemporary community festivals, but here you stand amid acacias and lantern light, feeling the living pulse of an artistic legacy that eclipses stone and pigment. These murals began as fleeting devotional images but evolved into multi-layered symbols of cultural resilience, creative exchange, and communal memory. You turn to leave, carrying with you the image of a painted cow's gentle eye set against twilight. That eye, rendered by anonymous hands 9 centuries ago, gazes across time, inviting each new viewer into its story. Whether in a remote Nubian chapel, a museum gallery, or a virtual reality tour, these cows continue to teach, challenge, and inspire an artistic legacy as enduring as the Nile itself. Word count, 1006, slow the pacing now. Let your breathing ease. The air cools as dusk settles, the world softening around each painted cow's steady gaze. You feel the hush of centuries echoing in your chest, a tranquil lullaby woven from whispered prayers, fading pigments, and the distant cry of desert wind. You rest beneath the acacia, tracing imaginary lines from cowhide to starlit sky, letting each thought drift like a feather on a river's surface. In this gentle pause, remember the hands that ground ochre and mixed egg tempera. The monks who chanted as brushes glided across plaster, the pilgrims who pressed palms and carved names into sacred walls. Their hopes, fears, and acts of devotion pulse in every surviving fleck of pigment, each a breath in a nearly endless chorus of faith. Now, ease your shoulders, allow your chest to expand on a slow inhale and recede on a soft exhale. Let the imagery of painted cows fade into soothing darkness. A promise that these silent guardians remain, watching over fields of memory while you step back into your own world. Rest in the certainty that art can outlast empires and endure in the quiet spaces of your mind. The cows stand sentinel, their painted eyes reflecting your own heart's yearning for connection, meaning, and peace. Sleep comes softly now, ushered by bovine hymns and desert lullabies.